So today we're going to be going through estimating fractions as decimals. Now, this skill is another one of those that's going to be relied on later on, that is part of that end of course exam that does not use a calculator. So albeit we know we can plug these into a calculator and get the answer like that, we're not going to be doing that. The second thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be practicing a specific type of division called long division, which we should remember from way back when, because later on in the course we're going to use something extremely similar to that in polynomial long division. So this isn't necessarily an exercise just in division, but it's in long division so that we can repeat that process later on. So without further ado, let's jump into number 1. So number 1, I need to take 150 and divide it by 8 and see what I get. Long story short, 150 is a lot more than 8, so I should get a number larger than 1. So one of the first things students tend to do, and we want to pay attention to this, is which one goes into what? Do I plug 150 into 8 or 8 into 150 via the long division process to get my answer? Well, I know 150 is a heck of a lot bigger than 8. So if I were to set up 150 divided by 8, I would get a number that is less than 1. So I know that that can't be the way that we do things. I'm going to have to flip around and say, let's plug 8 into 150. I know it sounds a little counterintuitive to what we're doing, but it'll give us the correct numerical value for our final answer. So let's do exactly that. Let's plug 8 into 150. Now, the first thing that we do is we check values. I'm saying, how many times does 8 fit into 1? Well, 8 does not fit into 1. It fits in a total of 0 times. So then I'm going to go and say 0 times 8 is 0, and I'm going to subtract that. So 1 minus 0 gives us 1, and drag down the next number. And I'm going to repeat this process. I'm going to say, how many times does 8 fit into 15? Well, 8 fits into 15 once without going over, so that's 8, and I'm going to subtract that. 15 minus 8 gives us 7, and drag down the next number. And again, I'm going to repeat that process. How many times does 8 fit into 70? It fits in 8 times. 8 times 8 is 64. Subtract that. So 70 minus 64 is 6. And now here's our first issue, is that we figured out 150 divided by 8 is going to be 18 point something. Point what, you ask? Well, because I can't fit 8 into 6, and so how do I figure out what that something is? Well, what we do is we go ahead and we add a decimal to our original problem and into the answer, and I go ahead and add a few zeros in there. That gives us the ability to drag down many more numbers, and I keep doing the same process, but because I've correctly placed my decimals, I keep doing the process and don't worry about dragging down a decimal at this point. I'm going to drag down my 0 and say 0. How many times does 8 fit into 60? Let's do this in orange. So 8 fits into 60 without going over 7 times. So 7 times 8 is 56. I'm going to subtract that. 60 minus 56 is 4. Drag down the next 0. Okay. Then I'll ask myself, how many times does 8 fit into 40? Well, it fits in exactly 5 times. And so luckily speaking, when we do this right here, it terminates the decimal. I have a remainder of 0, and there's no terms left, so no remaining digits. Let's assume that word says remaining. Oops, sorry. Couldn't see that. So 8 divided by, or 40 minus 40 is 0, so I have a 0 remainder, and I have no, imagine this word says remaining, digits left. So that means that that terminates at 18.75. So what is 150 divided by 8 to the nearest hundredth? Is going to be 18.75. No rounding needed. Perfect. So we see that the process is just trying to plug in a number into another number. So if I go ahead and try out number 3, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to plug 8 into 195. If necessary, I'll add a decimal and some zeros. But let's see if 8 fits evenly into 195. Spoiler alert, it doesn't, because 8 is even, 195 is not. So we're going to end up with some sort of a decimal. But let's give it a shot. Okay, So the first thing that I'm going to do is say, how many times does 8 fit into 1? Well, it doesn't, so 8 times 0 is 0. When I subtract that, I get 1, and I carry down the 9. Next thing I do is say, how many times does 8 fit into 19? Well, twice, for a total of 16. Subtract that, we'll get 3. Drag down the next one, and I'll say, how many times does 8 fit into 35? Well, it fits into 35 4 times, for a total of 32. And when I subtract that, I'll get 3. And now this is the point, because I haven't found a whole number answer, I'm going to have to add some zeros in here so that I can keep doing this process, which means my answer also has a decimal. So I drag down the 0, and I get, okay, how many times does 8 fit into 30? Well, that'd be 3 times 24. When I subtract that, I get 6. Bring down the next number. 8 fits into 60. Let's see, 8 fits into 60 7 times, for a total of 56. Let's subtract that, and I get 4. Now here's the deal. It says round to the nearest hundredth, and I have a hundredth. But what I know right now is I don't know whether or not that 7 rounds up or rounds down to a 7. So I'm going to have to do one last division process. So I get the next number, and it tells me whether or not this goes up or down. And so what I see right here, let's see, I'm out of colors, so let's go ahead and restart with red. 8 fits into 40 5 times. Now, the cool thing about this is that this actually terminates at the final one, so 0 remainder. So because there's 0 remainder, it terminates at this decimal. But again, we're wanting to round to the nearest hundredth, which means I'm only looking at that second decimal. And that 5 means that decimal rounds up. So my answer is 24.38. Let's actually put the equivalent to symbol right there. Perfect. Okay. So now why don't you go ahead and try out number 5. Go ahead, pause the video, unpause it when you're done, and see how well you did. Okay. Now you've had a chance to try it out, let's go ahead and set that up. I'm going to take 7, and I'll divide that into 180. Let's see. Trying to fit 7 into 1, it doesn't. So we get 1, carry down my 8. 7 fits into 18 twice, for a total of 14. I subtract it. Bring down the 0. 7 fits into 40. Oop. Hold on, we're going to do this in green. 7 fits into 40 5 times. 35, subtract it. And we get 5. So now I need to go ahead and plug in my decimal and give myself some more zeros so I can keep doing this process. Let's see, 7 fits into 50 7 times. 49. I have a remainder of 1. Drag down my next 0. 7 fits into 10. 7 fits into 10 once. So I subtract it. And I get 3. At this point, I have my 100th decimal place, but I need one more to see if that 1 rounds up to a 2 or stays a 1. So I'm going to go ahead and do that last 0. 7 fits into 30. Let's see, we're doing this in red again. 7 fits into 30 4 times for a total of 28. And I have a 2. So that means this process is not yet finished. Or we could say not yet terminated. So for some reason, we're stopping right here due to some other circumstance because I haven't terminated this decimal yet. But I don't need to because I really don't care about what decimals occur after the 4 because that 4 is going to tell me that 1 remains the same. I'm not going to need to round that up. So it's going to be a 25.71 roughly. Awesome. And so if that's just simple long division, again, we're going to see a process almost exactly like this when we hit polynomial long division later on in a later video. So we want to make sure that we know how to do it right here, because when we introduce x's and y's and other terms, it's going to be exactly the same, just with some letters included. So if we take a look at number 7, I see that I'm multiplying these two numbers, and the process isn't really going to be any different, because you might ask yourself, well, what do I do first? Do I multiply or do I divide? Well, remember with PEMDAS, I usually go left to right, but I can do either way that works. Because we know with fractions, if I place that 7 over a 1, I'm going to say, can I reduce either one of these? Well, 7 and 12 don't reduce. 147 and 1 don't reduce. 147 and 12, let's think about that. 7 plus 4 is 11, plus 1 is 12. So these are actually both divisible by 3. So what we can do is I can make this a little easier to work with. Let's say that is negative 7 over 1 times, let's see, 147 divided by 3 is going to give us 4, because that makes 12, 2, 7. So 3 fits into 2, 7, 9 times. And then 3 fits into 12, 4 times. So in essence, what we did right here was we went ahead and we divided both of these by 3. Just so we can visually see, I divided both those by 3 and I got 49 over 4. Now, this is a lot easier to work with because now I'm taking 7, multiplying it times 49, not times 147. So let's go ahead and do that. And I don't know about you, but I don't know what that multiplied off the top of my head is. So 49 times 7, 9 times 7 is 63. Carry the 6, 28. Makes 34. Okay. So we are left with the problem of negative 343 over 4. And this is actually the process that we're doing. Negative 343 divided by 4 is the final result of this. Let's go ahead and set that up. Now I'm going to take the number 4, divide it into 343. I'm not going to worry about the negative because I know that a negative divided by a positive means my answer is going to be a negative. So again, I'm going to deal with the positive values knowing that my answer is going to produce a negative number. And I'm going to do the same thing that we did before. Take the 4, try and fit it into 3. Doesn't work. So that gives us a 3. Bring down the 4. Then I'm going to say, how many times does 4 fit into 34? It fits in 8 times. Subtract that. I get 2. 4 fits into 23. Let's see, we did that in green next. 4 fits into 23 5 times for a total of 20. And I have 3 left over. So I know that this doesn't terminate at a whole number, which means I'm going to have to add a decimal. So I can keep bringing down some zeros. Let's see, 4 fits into 30. We did orange next. A total of 7 times. Subtract that. We get 2. Bring down another 0. And then we did purple. 4 fits into 20. Exactly 5 times. And because I have a 0 remainder right here, this terminates. Okay, so I know that this is exactly the answer. I don't need to do any sort of rounding. I know that when I take my original question, negative 7 times 147 over 12, I'm going to get exactly negative 85.75. Bingo. Okay. And so now that you've seen that the multiplication before we do division really isn't any different, we just want to go ahead and see, A, can we reduce? B, if we can't, go ahead and multiply them out, and then just do the same thing we've been doing. So why don't you go ahead and try that out on number 9. Go ahead and pause the video and pause it when you're done and see all you did. Okay. So with number 9, what we're going to do is we're going to check out and say 156, does that divide by 11? Well, 11 is a prime number, which means it's only 11. So 11 would fit into 15 once with 4 left over, 46. No, it does not. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply these two things out. Okay. So I'm going to take 156, multiply it times a 4. Let's see, 6 times 4 is 24. Carry the 2. carry the 2 again, 6. So we get negative 624 divided by 11. And this is the process that we're going through. So I'm going to take 11 and try and fit it into 624. I'm not going to worry about the negative because I know my answer is just going to be negative when I take a negative and divide it by a positive. Okay? So I go through the process. Does 11 fit into 6? No. So I take the 6 and I bring down the next number. Does 11 fit into 62? Well, yes, it does. It fits in exactly 5 times. And so we said we did this in blue. 11 times 5 is 55. When we subtract that, we get 7. Drag down the next number. 11 fits into 74 6 times, and that gives us 66. 66, that's going to be 4 4, so that's 8. And because it doesn't terminate right here, that means I just need to go ahead and add my zeros in there after the decimal. So that way I can keep going until I either terminate or until I know when to round. So drag down my next 0. Let's see, after green we did orange. So 11 fits into 87 times. That'll give us a 3. Okay. And after orange we did purple. 11 fits into 30 twice for a total of 22. Give us an 8. Now here, I know it's going to be 56 either 0.72 or 0.73. I don't know whether to go up or down. So I drag out this last number, and it's going to tell me if it goes up or down. So 11 fits into 8 7 times for a total of 77. I still have 3 left over. So this does not terminate. Perfect. So I have 3 as my remainder. This does not terminate at this, but that's okay because I've gotten everything I need to know. I know that 7 rounds that 2 up to a 3. So I know this is roughly equivalent to negative 56.73. Perfect. And again, now this whole sheet, if you take a look at it, can be done with a calculator. We're not worried about that for this because this is going to be covered on that end of course exam on the section that does not include a calculator. So we need to know how to do this by hand. And there we go.